Today I'm filming from the Ozark National Forest in northern Arkansas and near the Buffalo River Valley here. This hike here goes up to a waterfall, Eden Falls, and this has been a great hike, about 3 miles up, 3 miles back to the car. I was thinking about this location because there's an aspect of Jesus's leadership that's really surprising. We find that Jesus at times takes moments and even sometimes full days to withdraw from the crowd to be alone for a time of prayer and a time of meditation. And we see this early on in his ministry. Obviously, the most familiar to us is right after his baptism, Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights in preparation for his public ministry. Now, there's a lot of theological, historical things going on there, but in the end, he does withdraw from the crowd in order to prepare himself for ministry. There's another moment that we are maybe all familiar with, and that's right before his crucifixion, right before he's arrested. He goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. He withdraws even from his own disciples. He brings them with him, but then he withdraws even beyond them, and he prays for hours. In fact, remember, he got upset a little bit or frustrated a little bit with Simon Peter because they kept falling asleep. He said, could you not wait and watch and pray for just 1 hour even? And so we know he spent time in prayer. And this does beg the question a little bit. Why is it that if Jesus is fully God, that he needs to pray? And what is going on with, if he's fully God, that he is seeking out help or support through the Father in order to fulfill this ministry? And I think the answer, there's two aspects of that answer that are important. One theological, one really practical. Theologically, we find in the book of Hebrews that Jesus was just like us in all ways, except for without sin, which means that if Jesus had invoked his divine attributes in his public ministry, he wouldn't be just like us. If he were suddenly just drawing from his own divine supernatural power to heal, walk on water, feed 5,000 and so forth, then he would be something different than us. And so the book of Hebrews says he was a good high priest representative for us because he became just like us in all ways except for with absolute sinlessness. And so what we see in the New Testament is that Jesus relied on the Holy Spirit for miracles. It says that the Spirit of God was enabling him to perform miracles. We're told in the book of Romans that the Spirit of God is the means by which Jesus rose again from the dead. Romans chapter 1, the first 3 or 4 verses. Romans chapter 8, where Paul says, the Spirit of God that raised Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies. And so one aspect of this is the incarnational theology, where Jesus becomes fully human. And even though he's still fully divine, he doesn't invoke his divine prerogative, his divine attributes in his public ministry because he's become just like us. So he serves and ministers through the power of the Holy Spirit. He serves and ministers as fully human. And so there's one aspect. But there's a second aspect to it that's really important for us, which is that he's also modeling for his disciples. And his disciples, the initial call to the disciples is, follow me. The idea here is that he is living a life that the disciples should also live. And so one aspect of this, of Jesus going and praying in advance of his public ministry or before the cross, is a display to his disciples that they too should follow his example of prayer and seeking the Lord's guidance before major events and even daily life. We find that Jesus, even after the feeding of the 5,000, you might remember that Jesus put the disciples in a boat and that he himself went up to be alone to pray. And then as the storm came later in the night, he'd been praying all night long. He then comes walking to them in the midst of the storm. But one example of leadership and Jesus's withdrawal to be alone that I want to draw on today is in Luke's gospel, right before the calling of the 12 apostles, the formal calling of the 12 apostles, Jesus, it says, went to a secluded place, much like this, went to a secluded place. He got alone and he prayed all night long. And then after he prayed all night long, he came down and selected the 12 apostles. This is striking because here is God incarnate, yet God incarnate seeking godly wisdom. And so the aspect of leadership here is a dependence upon God and a need for solitude, a need for personal encounter with God. The temptation, especially for people who are maybe have certain gifts, they can sing, they can speak, they can do athletics really well, is to depend on our natural abilities. But if anyone could ever have depended on his natural abilities, we have the sinless Son of God, Jesus Christ, and yet we see him in the midst of a leadership decision, like selecting the 12 apostles who are going to come alongside him as his, not only his followers, but those that will continue this ministry beyond his life, his death and resurrection, that he spends a whole night in prayer seeking the Father's wisdom. And so this is a really stark reminder. Not only do we have that Jesus is just like us and that he depends on the Holy Spirit for all things, but we also have the example that he leaves us. And so today our devotional thought is just this: we're dependent upon God. We must depend on God's Holy Spirit to do anything. And the best way of demonstrating this is taking time to get away, to get alone, to get in isolation, away from the maddening crowd of the world, away from technology, away from all these things, and spend time alone with God in prayer and reflection and meditation. And so for today, I just want us to think about, as leaders, time of alone with God marks our dependence upon God for all good things. All things that we do, ultimately we're dependent upon him. And so that's our devotional thought for today.